Welcome to Guest of the Year. I'm the host. My name's Mike. Today's guest setlist curator is Christopher K. Coffman. Chris is a Master Lecturer of Humanities at Boston University and the author of the newly released Clowns in the Burying Ground, The Grateful Dead, Literature, and the Limits of Philosophy, out now via Duke University Press under its Grateful Dead Studies imprint. The fascinating, rigorous, but super digestible book examines how the Dead's lyricists drew from European and American literary traditions, using intertextuality and fragmentation to shape meaning in their work. It's out now and is linked in the show notes. Chris will be taking over as editor of the Grateful Dead Studies Journal, and he's currently accepting submissions for Volume 8. They're seeking scholarly articles, reviews of performances and media, and they're also seeking peer reviewers. Submission deadlines are coming up later this year. There's more information in the show notes if you're interested in submitting. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks very much, Mike, both for the introduction and for having me.
Pleasure to have you. This week's prize pack is provided by Seastones. Run by Liam Dolaher, Seastones makes hi-fi speakers with psychedelic custom panels. Liam recently shared prototypes for new speakers drawing from the Dead's pre-1974 sound system and featuring vintage surfboard inlays. Make sure to follow Seastones on Instagram. It's also linked in the show notes. Thank you, Liam. All right, here's how the game works. We'll play the first part of a Grateful Dead live track, and each contestant will use the messaging system to silently guess which year their performance is from. Contestants, who are all in a video conference together, can message in their guesses at any time during the clip or in the 10 seconds after it concludes. Whoever is furthest off is eliminated. The final two contestants will hear 3 tracks, and whoever is the least number of years off in aggregate wins, and continues on to next week. Our returning champ, Drane, is here, and we'll meet the rest of the Deadheads in a moment, but first, without further ado, the Grateful Dead.
Well, she married me a wife, traveled all my life, brought me out in the cold rain and snow, rain and snow. Run me out in the cold.
It was Cold Rain and Snow at RFK in DC on June 14th, 1991. Chris, great pick. Why did you choose that one?
Well, several different reasons. I think most immediately a totally personal one, which is it was the first song at my first show. So it has a kind of special place in my heart for that reason. I'm fortunate in that it got released on View from the Vault Volume 2, so I got video and some good sound out there, which not everybody has for their first show. But I did, and it's great, and I enjoy it, and I return to it a lot. At the same time, I think of it as a tune that has historical value in a couple other senses. It's a song with deep roots. You think of some of the Dead songs that go back, and The Lady with a Fan, Part of Terrapin, Straws and the Lady of Carlisle, Peggy-O, Jack-A-Row, some of the older folk tradition songs that they incorporated one way or another really just are brought to the fore for me in a tune like Cold Rain and Snow. So I appreciate it as this kind of like example of the history of the Dead's kind of musical sensibilities even before they come on the scene. And then I guess the third prong of it is that it's a song that, from where I sit, seems to have a not totally unique, but it doesn't share the space with a lot of other tunes, which is that it's from their first record, and it stays in the repertoire. You know, we're still hearing it in 1991. So in those three senses, like both personal and then in terms of the band's influences and then in terms of the performance repertoire, I think this song exemplifies the kind of tradition and the musical side of things. And since my book's like interested in the literary tradition that they tap into, this was like the musical side of it is the counterpart to what I talk about in the book, but I didn't want to neglect it either in the book or here, where we have these songs that just really open up the past for us.
When Hunter and Barlow were invoking literary tradition, they weren't just like hiding Easter eggs for well-read people. In your mind, what value were they imbuing the lyrics with? Like as it pertains to entertainment, the lyrics were always meant for an audience. So what were they bringing to the table by invoking literary tradition?
Well, I think it was just like a way of opening up the door to another component of what it is that they're doing. As I was saying a moment ago, Cold Rain and Snow, you hear this musical past is sort of brought into the present for us. And the same thing is true, among other things, the same thing is true with their nods to the literary tradition. Hunter, Barlow, Peterson, whomever, the songwriters, brought into play these wonderful, things that you really don't get in obviously most rock and roll or a lot of popular music. And it's another way of giving listeners access to this wider kind of temporal thing. We listen to a song like Cold Rain and Snow, we're hearing back through the decades. When we encounter some of the lyrics that nod to literary texts, that build on literary texts, we're having the door open sometimes hundreds of years into the past, maybe more, and actually more in some cases. So again, it does many things, but one of the things that's most related to the Cold Rain and Snow is that it kind of opens the door to how we think about their place in these various sorts of traditions. One most people talk about the most is like the folk music tradition, but there are these others too. And that's kind of part of what the effort of the book was about, kind of reveal those a little bit or make them a little more accessible.
Yeah, it succeeded. Thank you, Chris. Two people got it, Paul and Drane. We'll go to our returning champ, Drane. He is 52 from Gainesville, Georgia. He guessed 1991. Nice poll, Drane. Do you hear some Vince in there? What did it?
Well, I own that one on the video, got the old DVD. I think I wore that out. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that Cold Rain and Snow. Yeah, I heard some Vince doing the harpsichord sounding, and I heard some horns being there. So, but I love that one. It always blew my mind that the view from the Vault 1 is like 90, and Jerry's hair is all short, his beard's all trim, and then 91, it's like not even a year later, and he's like looking haggard. I was just like, wow, his hair goes really fast. I wish my hair grew that long at 50.
Paul also guessed 1991. He's 38 from New Jersey. Way to go, Paul. You're on to the next round. What'd you hear there?
I picked 91. I'm not really familiar with the 90s. I never really listened to it. I always bounce back and forth between early 70s, late 70s, a little bit of mid 80s. But I knew it wasn't any of that, and so I figured it was in the 90s, and to just be safe, I picked 91, so I didn't get too far into the weeds with 95 or whatever, like that, so that's why I picked 91.
Thank you. You're on to the next round. Along with Dave, he guessed 1990. Bart guessed 1993. Dave is 54 from West Belmer, New Jersey. Why 1990, Dave? What were you hearing?
I missed the keyboard player. I was just a guess. And I rarely miss the keyboard player. That's the rule number one, right? So I got the keyboard player wrong, but I was only a year off. So I feel like I got lucky.
No, you heard a lot of things correctly. So way to go, Dave. You're on to the next round. Bart is 48 from Birmingham, Alabama, 1993. Bart, reasonable guess. Tell us about it.
No, it's embarrassing. I heard Vince immediately, and I did not hear Bruce, which I'm pretty embarrassed about. So I figured this was 90s after Bruce had stopped touring with him. I thought Jerry sounded pretty damn alert and sharp, and I could not hear Bruce. I screwed that up. Well played, guys. I'm gonna go in the parking lot and commit hard car.
Bart, how'd you get into the Dead?
I had an older brother, so I was surrounded by kids 2-4 years older than me, and junior high, you're into Rush and The Doors and whatever else, Led Zeppelin. And I just remember the first time I heard the Dead. I don't know, it was like this kind of drunken, loopy country western music, Sugar Magnolia and Casey Jones, and fell hard for it. Became totally obsessed. Finally got to go to my first show, April Fool's 1990. We would all drive from Birmingham to Atlanta and go see shows at the Omni. Absolutely loved it. I remember being in the crowd and watching them take the stage and seeing, Jerry Garcia's Tiger guitar and just thinking, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in the same room as this guitar that I've studied pictures of, as some corn dog 15-year-old. But incredible show. I think the China Cat writer from that show ended up on Without a Net, and then a few months later, Brent died, and that was kind of crushing. But continued on to see them throughout the '90s, and have been a lifelong fan ever since.
Do you feel like the Dead came to the South enough?
That's a good question. I mean, I'd have to say yes, because they gave a lot of love to Atlanta. I mean, every spring tour, 3 nights without fail. I think at some point in the '90s, they might have opened spring tour in Atlanta, Hampton, Virginia. I don't know that they did much in Tennessee, but I mean, the fact that they came back to Birmingham, Alabama in 1995, certainly don't think they had to. Um, you know, uh, but I know that they are beloved in the South. It blows my mind how the Grateful Dead in 2020, 2025, 2026, it's almost become the default American classic rock music for college kids, and certainly, like, frat guys, in their 20s. If you came to Birmingham, Alabama today, and you went to breweries and bars, you would see Steal Your Face stickers everywhere. I can't explain that, but I'm proud of it.
Yeah. Actually, I had a question for Chris kind of about that. The kind of hypothetical thought experiment about the ship of Theseus. A ship takes off, and during the voyage, they replace every board on the ship one at a time. When it arrives, at its destination, is it the same ship? Can the Grateful Dead exist beyond all of the members dying? And are they the same band?
Yes and no. No, I think so. I think I'd respond by which academics often do, rephrasing the question back at you, which is like it would be the same music, right? They're carrying on the music, and the music plays the band. So if it's there and it's working, whether it's a cover band, some corner of somewhere that has 10 people in the audience, or it's Dead and Co. as they were up until a few months ago, right? Filling a stadium, no matter how many people are in the room. If it's on, it's on. Could be 2 guys playing guitars in their living room, right? As far as whether or not it's the same band, geez, I'd say yes, but I still hate that I never saw Big Pen or Keith. There's a loss for sure in some of those components, but I'm not somebody who would go to bat saying like, post Keith or something, we're not going to listen to this. And I don't think necessarily that we should do that with some of the people some of the performers who came in on board after the Grateful Dead as the sort of total entity ended. The ship of Theseus metaphor, though, it kind of leaves or the thought experiment. It doesn't prioritize any one board on the ship, right? There's no Jerry board. The thought experiment says all the boards are kind of equal. So that's a little twist that makes it harder, I think, to think through. But yeah, I'd still say, I'd still go with it's the music that's the ship, right? And it carries all of us along.
Would you extend that to a guitarist in a Starbucks playing acoustic version of Purple Rain? Is that an extension of Prince's legacy, or is there something specific about the Dead that lends itself to that kind of generous interpretation?
Well, that's a really good question. I think part of certainly for me, but I think probably for many, many Deadheads, is like it's about the music. Grateful Dead music is about a lot of voices in conversation with one another, and not knowing where that conversation is going is part of the magic. Seeing where it goes is part of the thing that you enjoy. If I were to sit down and play a Prince tune in a Starbucks or something, like, I would know where that song's going. I might have like make space for a little solo or something, right? But I kind of know where the shape of the thing is going to be. And if it's just me, I'm not really in conversation with any other performer. So that kind of uncertainty that lends itself to the mystery of one of the things that I think draws a lot of us to the Dead's music wouldn't happen in that situation. I think Prince is great. I think people should honor his legacy and keep playing those tunes. But I don't think that it works the same way the Grateful Dead music works.
Ooh, thank you. Bart, do you feel like artists nowadays come to the South enough, or specifically Alabama?
it's funny that you're asking me these questions. I actually just opened 2 music venues in Birmingham, Alabama, so I'm a promoter and, I'm in this business, but, this part has anything to do with the South. I think that the live music industry today, post the shift to streaming and how that completely changed the music industry, slowly but completely, and then COVID, and how that changed touring. We are in a new reality that it's still kind of settling in, but live music today is just not what it was in 1998, or 1988 or 1978, and it's a shame. I think it's unreasonably difficult for artists to make a living touring live. So everything's gotten over financialized, over monetized. It's gotten too expensive, yet, the money's not making it to the artist. And then there's a lot of really interesting kind of cultural things that happened with COVID where everybody was locked up and then COVID was over and everybody ran out to music festivals and concerts in the year after. And then they sort of retreated again. And they're like, I kind of liked being an introvert. I sort of liked working from home. I do think the South holds its own. I mean, you see new venues being built in Nashville and Atlanta. And yeah, big tours come through the South. I mean, there's pockets. It's not as dense as the Northeast. I think if you're in Florida, it can be tough to kind of get to see shows. But I would say this if I can, and I don't think this is necessarily about the South, but the state of touring. I think we are living in a very awkward, strange, disconnected time where we are hurtling toward this future that no one asked for. And, the worst news, the most horrific thing in the world or the country at any moment is being beamed directly into our pocket. And with AI and the political situation, everything, it has just led to a very kind of uncomfortable, dark, weird place. I always think about the lyric from Ballad of a Thin Man, like we know something's happening, but we don't know what it is. I think that in this context, it is a perfect time for live music to become more valuable than it's been in a long time. And so, professionally, like I'm investing in live music. I'm investing in a venue. I'm supporting it. I think that people are longing for opportunities to be here now and be in, part of a community and experience things that are analog and tactile and live. And so that's where I'm kind of placing my spiritual bets these days because the fucking internet, and it just sucks. It just depresses the hell out of me. And the mass market media music industry sucks, and it's depressing. So God bless the good old Grateful Dead, and I think what they represent in our culture, and the fact that they're more popular than ever before. And I got I got college kids and they get it and they're into it. And so I hope we're at the beginning of a new golden age of community and live music. People have to get up off their ass at 7 o'clock at night when they're tired and they're streaming some show on Netflix and put on a fucking jacket and go out and see some art, and like you gotta have a market for it. And if you don't, then all we're going to have is mass produced, mass product controlled by large corporations and private equity. And they're going to charge $11 for a beer and $35 for a parking space.
Well, thank you for putting your money where your mouth is and being part of the solution. It's really, really cool. So is there anything you can plug that will let people know about the venue or anything like that?
Sure. Birmingham, Alabama. The 2 spots I mentioned, the 2 stages, Lakeview Marina is a outdoor, small kind of micro amphitheater next to Seasick Records. And then we have a coffee shop cocktail lounge on the same property that is, I think, one of the world's best hi-fi audiophile listening lounges. and it's called the High Dive Hi-Fi Lounge, and extremely Dead friendly. We have every official Grateful Dead release on vinyl and in CD, all Dick's, Dave's, everything else, and do live bands in both places. And yeah, we launched both of them in the last 3 months. And yeah, man, thank you.
I'll include the links to that in the show notes. Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
awesome, Bart. Well, Dave, Paul, and Drane are on to the next round. Let's hear Chris's second pick.
Smiling on a cloudy day.
The other one at Crystal Ballroom in Portland, Oregon on February 3rd, 1968. Chris, tell us about that pick.
Yeah, so as you guys probably know, in very early 68, the band toured the Pacific Northwest with Quicksilver, and this is the next to last show of the tour. So Bobby's been working on the lyrics. If you listen to earlier versions of it, there's some variation in the lyrics, but this is the night. He does actually flub them a little bit, but this is the night he's using the set of lyrics that we all like know and love from Other One these days. So the show stands out for that reason. There's also this night an early Dark Star, and the other one less so, but the Dark Star in particular, but the other one as well. You have this feeling with these really early ones that the band's kind of finding their way into the piece, and the music wants to breathe, and they haven't maybe quite figured out how to give it enough room to breathe the way that it will in later years. Dark Star's not what it's going to be in even a year later in early 69, like the Dark Star we all know from Live Dead. But I love this like kind of moment where everything's in formation. And this show gives us a lot of that. It gives us that with the other one in Bobby's lyrics and then what the band's doing musically. But it still sounds great. The performance of this on the 3rd and then the following gig that they have kind of straddle this night where Neil Cassidy, who's of course mentioned in the song, collapses on railroad tracks in Mexico, is carried off, and then the next day he dies, and the band only hears about that when they get back to San Francisco after the tour, part of half a week later. John Perry Barlow's written a lot about this, and other people have too, about the sort of connections between Weir and Cassidy in particular. I'm very interested in that relationship because the band's into Kerouac, and Cassidy is this kind of emblem of Kerouac and the other beats. And he becomes this point of contact between what's going on with the Merry Pranksters and Kesey, what went on with Kerouac and the Beats before the Dead become the Dead, and then the band's own interest in the Beats and in some cases friendships and professional relationships with the Beat poets and novelists. And so that's an interesting one for me because in the book when I read about all of the literary connections, some of them are very old, thinking about them in relation to Shakespeare or something like that. But the Beats were there. They were present. They knew them as individuals in their own moment. So the other one, I love the tune, but this particular performance of it for me is one that kind of brings together in this really succinct way how they related some of the literary figures of their day and how they brought that into the music. And it's right there with Cowboy Neil.
I'm kind of skipping to the end of your book here, or I am skipping to the end of your book here, but you kind of say that not only are Hunter and Barlow invoking literary tradition, they're also contributing to it in the same way that Kerouac did. And I'm wondering how you came to that conclusion.
Well, I mean, I guess I could answer it by comparing what I might say about that to what I was saying earlier about Cold Rain and Snow. You know, the folk tradition works in a certain kind of way. You have this tune, somebody some years later, maybe in a slightly different place, like maybe it's an old British Isles folk tune and it gets transplanted to Appalachia and some performer records it in that context later on. And then maybe his recording of that song becomes something that shapes the way the Dead play. And then maybe there's some band out there that plays some Dead tunes and tries to write some originals that are like the Dead tunes or maybe inspired by them. And you get little lines, you get verses, you get images, you get emblems that get passed down through the tradition in that way. And there's a lyrical side to it and there's a musical side to it. So that, I think, is something that Cold Rain and Snow pointed to. I think in terms of the literary legacy of the Dead, I did want to show, you know, it's not just that they're drawing on all the stuff that came before them, but they're setting, in the same way that they do with music, to some extent what they do lyrically is kind of setting the stage for what's going to come after. And there are a tremendous number of writers, some of them quite major figures, who, some of them just mention the Dead in passing, some of them really... I spent a long time in the conclusion of my book on this part you're asking about, talking about Douglas Copeland's Polaroids from the Dead, which is about, in part, his experience of a couple of shows, and then his imagination of like what's going on in the parking lot inside the vans after the show and so forth. So there's some real evidence already that what they did with their lyrics and what they were as a kind of cultural phenomena did have an impact on not only what journalists were doing, you know, you get Tom Wolfe and Joan Didion, Hunter S. Thompson doing their thing, but then also what poets and novelists are doing. Writing about all of that would have required a couple more chapters, and I had a due date. But it's definitely something we're thinking about, and I expect, you know, I don't know what's coming next, but I expect we're going to see more of it.
What does Bob Dylan winning the Nobel Prize say about lyricists being part of the literary tradition?
I think what we've seen is that people are really conflicted about that question. I think a lot of people were like, oh, Dylan, he's a songwriter. He can't win the Nobel Prize for literature, right? But then the fact that he did it becomes its own justification, right? I mean, the Nobel Prize people, they sometimes seem to take like a perverse pleasure in picking people that the audience won't expect they'll pick. You know, when Garcia and Hunter, I talk about this a little bit in the chapter on Dylan in my book, you know, when Garcia and Hunter, when they first run into Dylan, they don't like him too much. They don't like the music, because that's when Jerry's like in this bluegrass purist phase, and he doesn't like the fact that people are writing new tunes like that are outside the folk tradition or outside the canon of bluegrass music. And so when Dylan's coming up with his own music, Garcia's kind of like, what is this guy? That's disrespectful. But he changes his mind after not too long, and particularly with bringing it all back home, I think. And Garcia and Hunter talking about Dylan say, you know, he gave the music something, he gave rock and roll like something that we really wanted, which was a kind of authority. And so if you're thinking about the implications of Dylan getting these major recognitions from the literary side of things for his achievements, I think it's just you know, the Mr. Joneses have figured out what it is that's going on, and and they're ready, right? They're ready to sort of give him that thing and check the box, because I don't know, it's almost like I don't know, I don't want to say it was an apologetic thing, right? But it was a long time coming in some ways. I mean, he was, for good reason, credited with giving voice to, if not a generation, a lot of the central concerns of certain generations.
Thank you, Chris. All these guys got it in 1968. Paul, were you considering 67, or did you write 68?
No, I was hoping somebody else would have guessed the wrong year. That was a rough one, man. I couldn't figure. I knew it was 60s. I heard the organ in there. I thought the funniest part was how much Bob sounded like Phil, like a little bit to me. Anyway, I was listening to it, and I was like, oh shit, no. But yeah, no, I just picked 68. Yeah, good job, everybody. Good job.
Dave, did you consider other years, 69, 67?
My gut right off the bat was 68. You know, it's not 66. It's not 60. Well, it could be 67, but I was thinking 68 and just went with my gut, 68. That's what it sounded like.
Right on. And Drane.
68 all the way. 100%.
All right. These guys are good. Let's hear Chris's next pick.
Child
So the guesses are in. It was Althea at Meadowlands in East Rutherford, New Jersey, October 11th, 1989. It was an unknown taper, but it was transferred by John Ammons and Joe Knoll. Chris, I heard the book's title. Can you tell us about it?
Thinking about Althea is in some ways the effort that launched the small project that then became a bigger project and then became part of the book. So in some ways, it's like where I started with all this stuff I've been doing for a little while, more than a little while. I was originally just trying to like map out really for myself, like the Shakespeare references in the tune. Ophelia is like the most obvious kind of superficial one. But the more I dug into it, there was a lot more Hamlet. And then I found that there's some intriguing connections to some of the Shakespeare's history plays, Henry IV and Henry VI. And that was something that really surprised me when I kind of stumbled across a couple of things that seemed to me really convincing evidence that Hunter was drawing really deeply on Shakespeare's well in this song, elsewhere too, but this song in particular. My go-to version, I think it's probably true of a lot of people, of Althea is the 3:15:90 from Without a Net. This one, unless I missed something, is the final Althea with Brent that hasn't yet been officially released. Yeah, so if you think of the ones you know from tail end of 89 and 90, this is the last one before any of those. So I thought that would be like a good thing to bring into play. And you get that little bit of the slide stuff going on, so I didn't know if that would help somebody. Anyway, yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking in terms of performance history, and also sort of like why I picked it was in part because it was the thing that motivated me to really get working on what becomes the book.
So only one person got it, Paul. Way to go, Paul. 89.
I knew it was in early 80s, and knew it was in mid 80s, and we just did a 90 in the beginning. Doesn't mean it couldn't be another one, because this show is known to give you curveballs all the time. But I was like, all right, well, if it can't go too far, because I heard Brent, right? So I can only go up to 90. So I was like, all right, maybe a little on the nose. Let me hit 89. That was my gut feeling, and I just went with it.
Way to go. Dave guessed 87. He was 2 years off, so he's onto the finals with Paul because our returning champ, Drane, guessed 93. Dave, 87.
Wow. So it started out, it's an audience recording, and wasn't hearing much. I heard a little bit of slide in there, and it become more prevalent as it went on. I was thinking in my mind, I'm like trying to hone in on Chris and where he's coming from. Althea, where's he going with this? I know a lot of people like early 80s Altheas, but this was not that. And I really couldn't hone in too much. I did hear Jerry come in, and that guitar sounded more of the late 90s. I didn't hear any MIDI. That run, 89, Burn, a lot of MIDI effects. Didn't hear much of that, so I wasn't thinking Burn. And I know there's some great Altheas from 87, at least in my opinion. That's why I guessed 87.
Way to go, Dave. I like you're playing the curator, too. You got to start doing that at some point in the game if you're going to win this thing. Drane knows a thing, too, about winning Guest of the Year. Nice run, Drane. Tell us about 93.
I have an Autzen Stadium from 93 that Bobby is just really sliding all over it, dropping some weird slide bombs on, and I really couldn't hear much at all. I when it comes to my ear, I cannot really hear over that crowd very well when it's that kind of audience recording. So I think I was off like 6 years last time with one of those. So I'm improving.
Drane, thanks for coming on Guest of the Year. I really appreciate you, man.
Definitely.
Before we go on to the next round, the finals, 3 songs. Dave, how did you get into the Grateful Dead?
Rock and roll in high school, and I had a few friends who went to a show in 1986. They went to RFK, and they took a bus down there, and when they came back, they were like, Dave, you're going. I was huge into heavy metal at the time. I think Metallica was my favorite band. And at one point, it was both Metallica and the Grateful Dead. I was a conflicted youth, but I still like heavy metal, Metallica. But The following year in '87, we went to Giant Stadium with Bob Dylan. So there's a funny story. I was a senior in high school, and they want to put your ambition below your photo. Mine was to find my face at Giant Stadium. So they stole my face. It's buried somewhere with Jimmy Hoffa underneath the stadium. I don't know. Just forever, like into the music and into Grateful Dead sets. Yeah.
How often are you compelled to see Metallica? They play a lot of the same songs. Obviously, they change setlists, but they play a lot of the same songs in the same way. So how often are you drawn to be like, ooh, I'd like to see Metallica?
For a long time, it really wasn't. I didn't really need to see them. I've seen them a few times, but I just saw a few live shows. They're on Nugs sometimes, and about a month ago, they impressed me with a recent show I was watching, and I would like to go. Sure, I would prefer them in a smaller venue rather than a huge outdoor stadium with so many people. I think a smaller gig would suit me fine, but would like to see them. And I heard they're looking to change up their set list on maybe the Sphere. They're going to do the Sphere. Heard a rumor they want to do different songs. So, and I would only see them once. I wouldn't go to a run.
Thank you, Dave. So you're facing off against Paul. 3 tracks of Chris's choosing. Whoever is the least number of years off, over 3 tracks, wins Guess the Year. Let's hear the first song of the finals.
Won't pull you through. Put on any else, put you down on Fog Avenue. They got some hungry creatures there that surely make a present out of you. Well, if you see Sweet Annie, please tell her thanks a lot. Stocks are twisted and my tentacles are all in a knot. I don't even have the strength to get up and take another drop. And my best friend, my drummer, won't even tell me what it was that I dropped.
Just like Tom Thumb's Blues at the Spectrum in Philly on March 25th, 1986. The taper is unknown. Chris, there it is, the intersection of Dylan and the Dead.
Yeah, well, I really wanted to get some Dylan thing in here because when I was first discovering the Dead, I guess I got into Dylan just like a very little bit of time before I got into the Dead. And I saw my first Dylan show about a month after I saw my first Dead show. So the two of them were, for a very long time, kind of like I would just alternate one record to the next on the turntable. I spent a long time trying to pick this track. I didn't know if I wanted one where they were both like on stage at the same time or if I wanted a cover. I listened to a lot of Visions of Johanna. I listened to a lot of Desolation Rose. And eventually I was like, okay, I'll get this kind of like Desolation Row that isn't one of the ones that we all know from like 89 or 90, whatever. And then I went back to this show and I saw that not only did it have that, but it had this Tom Thumbs. And I was like, oh my gosh, a double Dylan show, but it doesn't have We're doing a Dylan slot, right? So it's a little unusual in that way. And I waffled a little bit. And then finally I was just like, let Phil sing, So there it was.
Dennis McNally came on the show, guest of the year, and stated pretty matter-of-factly that Visions is the best song on Dylan's best album. Now, whenever I listen to it, I kind of contrast what I'm listening to that point. But you mentioned Visions of Johanna alongside Truckin' as a tension between motion and paralysis. And I'm wondering if you could tell us about that.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that are interesting on that front to me about Truckin', but some of the lines that maybe capture it is something like, they're going to all these different cities, but they're all on the same street, right? There's the sense that like you're very much in motion, you're moving around, but you are in some ways not getting anywhere. It's like Kerouac saying, go, go, go. He doesn't say where to go. He's just like, just do it, right? So the motion itself becomes the thing. And it's not about where it, I mean, this isn't true for everything, but for that part of that song, there's this kind of like weird sense of once trucking along, but at the same time not really going anywhere. And then that kind of, I don't know, I don't want to call it an indecisiveness, but it's like part of the song is all about getting back home. But then when you sit down, you get home, you sit down, you rest your bones, but then you get up and you get trucking again. It's like you can't have one without the other. So that's what I was thinking about in terms of that. My reading of Visions of Johanna, this great book called Bob Dylan's Poetics by this guy, Timothy Hampton. I was leaning a lot on his argument about Visions of Johanna in there. And he reads it as a, I don't know, almost a kind of like psychodrama, like this person, we have these couple of people or actually maybe kind of like different variations of the same person. And some of them are kind of frozen in place and they're in a kind of uncomfortable place. It's like the ghost of electricity housed in the bones of her face. Like those kinds of lines, they're like deeply unsettling. And so they're like really powerful images. And some of them are really images of tension or even suffering. And in Blonde on Blonde, much more than the album or a couple of albums even that came before, is really like about the individual dealing with stuff a lot of the time, more than the individual in relation to the world. And so in Visions of Johanna, you get this one, toward the end, you get this one character or version of the central character who's like going to leave and get on the road. And then this other one's kind of stuck in this place. And it's almost, if you regard them as a kind of two versions of the same person, it's almost like they're trying to figure out a way to do both at the same time. Like, how do you get out of the traps you found yourself in and escape? But then also, like, if you get on the road, what are you going to do? Are you going to find yourself on the same street? And so anyway, both Dylan and the Dead are kind of like in those two songs, or at least parts of those two songs, kind of like negotiating this like beat inheritance of being on the road, but then also maybe some other kinds of things that inhibit you from, maybe sometimes things within you that inhibit you from really taking advantage of that.
And all the above use fragments, which is a huge part of the book about how Garcia preferred, for instance, the Terrapin, unfinished Terrapin versus Hunter's complete Terrapin. Why is the fragment version of songs sometimes more evocative than the complete version?
Well, it's because, I mean, it opens itself up to possibilities, like in some ways it's like what I was saying very early on in this conversation, the Dead's tendency and preference, I think, judging on things they've said in interviews and so forth, is to leave things open, to leave space for new potential to be manifest. And the evocative ambiguity or the fragment creates an opportunity for that to happen. And it's something the audience can participate in, right? You think about like, wow, where could this take me? This little idea that's not fully formed in the sense of being closed, like getting to the point where it's closed off, but is fully formed enough that it gestures to something beyond what it's already said. It's not that it needs to go somewhere in particular. It's just that it like leaves open the sense of potential, the sense of possibility, maybe even a sense of adventure. And to me, that's a big part of what the Dead were about. And I think it's what a lot of their lyrics help us navigate.
Again, Clouds in the Burying Ground. It's full of insightful information like Chris just delivered and continues to deliver. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. That was really kind.
Yeah, it's true. Dave was closer. He guessed 85. Paul guessed 93. Paul shakes his head. Dave, jump out to an early lead. You were right on it. What were you hearing?
Initially, I was thinking it was 85 Hershey Park. And I knew that Top Gun Blues from that show was the opener. and Phil drops a big bomb. So I was like, this is not that one. Just my gut was telling me to stick with 85. That's all. After I was thinking that. I ran out of time, so I just went with my gut.
It's working. Keep it going. Way to go, Dave. Paul, you look a little distraught. 93.
Yeah, I blew that one, huh? Holy crow. This is what happens when I try to like compete with you guys. You guys are so intelligent. You know so much more stuff. Like I just like listening to the music and I can't remember crap, but I do remember this is what I got ahead of myself with is that I remember there was like a time where I learned this fun fact that like Phil sang, he only had a couple songs and that like he stopped and didn't sing anything for like a big gap. And I was like, "Oh, this sounds like a more recent recording. It doesn't sound like an early 80s type of a vibe to me anyway." And this was mid 80s, so whatever. But then I was like, "Oh, maybe it's the one show that Phil came back and he sang one of the songs. I don't remember his Tom Thumb's Blues, or he had the other song too that he sang a couple times. I don't remember what the name of it is, but I tried to outsmart myself and I completely botched it. And then I was like, if I guess 93, like Drane did, it's a bad luck number. And I did it anyway. Look what happened. 93 is no good. 93 stinks. We don't like that, but
Nah, it's reasonable and odd with Phil singing. He sounds pretty much the same in 86 and 93, unlike everyone else in the band. Paul, how'd you get into the Dead?
in my teenage years in high school, like Dave, I love metal. Early on, loved Metallica, loved all that stuff, Slayer, all that stuff. And then when I was a teenager, you started expanding your horizons a little bit more, and I started playing music pretty early, around like 9 years old. So, and then me and my brother kind of just like would fart around in our garage and just make noise. And what I learned to like to do when I was young, because I didn't know, there was no internet, I had no tab books or anything. I was just kind of making stuff up, and so like improvisational music was like something we got real clicky with, like real early on, my brother and I, because it's just fun. Hey, look, I could play these 3 chords, and then you play a rhythm, or vice versa, because he played the drums and I played the bass, so we would just make noises. And then like when we would like groove on these like little jams, and we would take it for like, because we would play the same shit for an hour and drive my mother completely insane. But then when I was a teenager, I find, what was the first streaming thing, was like what, LimeWire or Napster, or one of those things, right? And I got a hold of some live Dead, because to be honest with you, I don't really like recorded Dead. It drives me nuts now that I know that there's live Dead, because the songs are great, but you put the live version on, it's not even close. And once I heard live Grateful Dead, and I heard Scarlet Fire Combo for the first time, and Terrapin live, I was like, this is like insane. This is so good. This is crazy. And then I just, from there, carried it with me for my whole life.
Thank you, Paul. Paul has 7, Dave has 1, going into the second of 3 songs of the finals. Let's hear Chris's next selection.
In the timbers of the wolves are running round. The winter was so hot and cold, those 10 feet beneath the ground. Don't murder me, I beg of you, don't murder me. Please don't murder me. I sat down to my supper, 'twas a bottle of red whiskey. Said my prayers, went to bed, that's the last they saw of me. Don't murder me, I beg of.
Okay, the guesses are in. Dire Wolf, Winterland in San Francisco on October 26th, 1969. Chris.
Well, I think everybody here knows better, but even in spite of knowing better, I tend to think of 1969 all the way up through the end of the year as like this like heavy jamming, totally psychedelic, hairy monster kind of music thing. And it's good. A tune like this reminds me that the stuff that was going to end up on Working Man's Dead appears in '69, and they're playing it, and it's a great evolution to listen to. So this is a song that for me kind of emblematizes the connection, the continuity between like Primal Dead and then the rootsier stuff of 1970. And in that way, I think it's really special. There are other tunes to do that, but this one does also. The other thing that has always like really drawn me, for better or worse, to Direwolf is that, the Dead are like, their music for so many people, so much of the time is this like totally wonderful, uplifting thing, wonderful sentiments in songs like Eyes of the World and so forth. But then there's this darker side to the Dead, and they were able to write about the whole spectrum of experience. And I think a lot of people, especially people who are new to them, but I even have to remind myself of this sometimes, there's like, they didn't shy away from risk. They didn't shy away from things sometimes that were kind of ugly. And the particular version of Direwolf that I picked, before it starts, Garcia, I wrote it down here, Garcia says to the crowd, "This song's dedicated to the Zodiac and to paranoid fantasies everywhere, and everybody can sing along if they feel up to it. It's real easy to sing." So the Dead were like premiering this song or working through the early stages of the song, and they try it in all different kinds of ways. Like we're singing bits, Garcia singing bits, the pedal steel, acoustic, electric, like they go through singing parts of it twice, singing some of it only once. They really experiment with the arrangements a ton and the instrumentation a ton. But consistent through all of them is like this real danger that's kind of like on the streets in California. The Tate LaBianca murders are in August of '69. And in the quote that I just read, Garcia references the Zodiac killer. And in talking about the song, sometimes he says, I'd be driving home from the studio and a car would pull up to me and I was afraid I was going to get murdered. It was like a literal like plea not to be murdered, getting home from the show or something. That ability of the Dead to kind of like just deal with not only the beautiful things and the uplifting things and to transport us into all of these brilliant places, but then also to keep us grounded and to acknowledge other parts of human experience. The song does it wonderfully for me, and I really love it.
And it kind of bridges current events, the Zodiac murdering people indiscriminately across San Francisco, and folk tradition, right?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, musical and literary traditions. I write about it in my book in relation to Hound of the Baskervilles and some other stuff, some things having to do with Mary Shelley. But it's also, there's long history of literary texts and then also songs, like Nick Drake's Black Eyed Dogs are a great example. These Black Dog songs are kind of these like haunting presences, Hellhound on My Trail kind of things. It makes its way into the song for sure.
Nice pick. And Dave was closer, 1970. Paul guessed 73. So Dave takes a 9-year lead going into the last track. Dave, why 70?
Just the other day, I heard Bob Weir singing Direwolf for the first time in my life. It was an early version. So here's Jerry singing it. I'm assuming it was after that, and I couldn't decide. Chris, you threw me the Hairy Monster curveball. I wasn't thinking 69 because it's so like crazy at times. So I guess 70 with the lower the acoustic sets they did, and that was my guess, 70.
Yeah, it's a good guess. Paul, 73, also reasonable.
Man, I didn't know what the hell was going on. And I was listening to Jerry's voice, and it just sounded more mature than the 60s for me. 60s, Jerry voice is like he's a young guy. And then all the feedback, I was like, oh, this is like a lot. Like they don't, something's going around. They don't know what the fuck's going on. So maybe they're on tour. I don't know. Trying to be too smart again instead of just listening and guessing. You know what I mean? Try to think about it.
It's a hard game, Paul.
Yeah.
Okay, so Chris, before we go on to the final track, possibly the final track, how did you get into the Dead?
How much time do we have? So it happened, I guess, more or less in two phases. I kind of knew about them some growing up. I got more curious about them, I guess, late in the Brent years. I knew some of the radio hit kind of things, but I just didn't know much about them. But then a friend of a friend got busted and he was underage, so he wasn't like looking at like super punishment or anything, but he had tickets for shows, and his parents were like, there's no way you're going to Dead shows right now. And I ended up buying one off him, and I went to my first show, and I didn't know like a lot of the music. I didn't know what to expect. It ended up being a great show, and I was totally blown away. The music, the scene, like everything. And in the remainder of the 90s, I saw a number of other shows, collected some tapes, that kind of thing. And then after Jerry died, I rode that enthusiasm for a while, but I also was like getting bummed that I couldn't go see him. And then at the same time, I went to grad school. So I moved to go to grad school, and a lot of the people I started hanging out with, we were playing music together, and they weren't in the Dead. So I was listening more to the music they listened to, just to, sort of like help the performances. And after I finished grad school and moved again, I got back into them a little bit, and then it just sort of like snowballed. I know, let me see, this would have been 2009. The Dead with Warren Haynes played in Worcester. And I went out and they did two shows. I don't remember if I saw the first or second, but I caught one of them. It was the first time I'd been to any kind of Dead show since like Jerry, basically. And I was like, wow, this feels like coming home. So at that point, in some ways, even more than I had been back when I was going to see shows and collecting tapes, I was like then on the bus more than I ever had been before. So I frantically, started going to see Further and Rat Dog and the Dead, and then a little later on, Dead and Company. And I saw one show that was like TC and Donna. I saw some interesting little mixes. So yeah, starting, I don't know, what would that have been? Yeah, 2009, the Worcester show. So the past 17 years or so, I kind of like really got in deep. And that's where everything that I've been doing in terms of writing about them has come from.
Yeah, and now you're taking over for Nick Merriweather as the editor of this journal. What are you looking for in submitted papers? And why do you think the Dead are such fertile ground for, academically rigorous investigation?
In terms of the first question, what am I looking for? I think I have two things in mind. One is I want to, like, Nick, we all owe Nick a huge debt. He in terms of the scholarly part of what's going on with understanding the Dead, because he forged a lot of that ground, and he brought it to a place where it's sustainable, and that the amount of work is just amazing. I know just from like considering this one little corner of it, just like how monumental a task it must have been to get everything he did into motion. So one part, I guess, is I'm just trying to fill those big shoes, make sure that the quality of material is what people have become used to from the journal. Beyond that, it's going to vary a little bit. I think issue to issue, I have a couple ideas. I don't want to give them away now because I don't want to look foolish when somebody hears this podcast 6 years from now and says, hey, he really dropped the ball on that. But no, I think for example, one of the things we're doing in the next issue, there's this other guy, Nathaniel Racine, who's actually the president-elect of the GDSA, is putting together a special section on Bobby Peterson. So we're going to have some papers looking at that. We'll have some reviews. There's been a lot of changes going on. There have been a lot of musical releases, the big Enjoying the Ride box sets. We'll have like reviews of some of those kinds of things. But yeah, beyond that, just trying to like really keep the conversation going is my goal. Like bring in as many things from as many different perspectives as I can, try to set them in conversation with each other, which I guess kind of leads me to the second thing you asked. They lend themselves to different disciplines more easily, I think, than some bands. Like there are some great musicologists who do work on the Dead. And that in some ways I tend to think of as the heart of things. But then, there's the whole fan culture, like the whole world of Deadheads. And that's something that sociologists and anthropologists can do something with. What is this culture, the subculture all about? What makes it tick? What made it so huge? What was it about the people who were drawn to this band that encouraged them or made them think even that they could and they did sustain it. They still are maintaining it, right? And it's being passed down. So it has this generational kind of thing. You can do longitudinal work with it in a way maybe you can't with some other fans of other bands. So that's a component of it. You can do the kind of a thing I do, right? Sort of literary analysis of the lyrics. And that's possible with them in a way it's not with most other people. Maybe, Dylan, I guess, is an exception. But if you're going to analyze somebody's lyrics and you're going to think about them seriously, you have to understand where they where they come from in terms of a tradition. And for me, the literary tradition is a way to think about that. So, bring together musicologists and sociologists and cultural anthropologists and literary scholars and lots of other people working from other positions. And they just all find something in the dead. You can get people who are interested in sound technology, right? Talking about the wall of sound. The band was so innovative, and it was always looking for new avenues of doing what it did or expanding what it did, like, let's get our own record label. Hey, let's make a movie, right? Like, they just kept finding these doors to open. And I think that adventurousness meant that they provided a rich ground for sort of scholarly inquiry. And maybe more than anything else, the people who do like work in American studies or like late 20th century American history or something. How are you going to understand that period without understanding what was going on with the youth movement? And how do you understand the youth movement without understanding its music? And what's at the heart of its music in the late 60s, right? So all the roads lead back there, and all the roads lead out from there. It's a nexus.
Well, we really appreciate your coming on the show and writing this book and now heading the journal. And you have one more pick for us. So let's hear Chris's next selection. Okay, so that was a jam out of Wharf Rat into Going Down the Road Feeling Bad at Cole Park in Hartford, Connecticut on August 2nd, 1976. Chris, what an inspired pick. Tell us about it.
Well, as much as I'm into the Dead's lyrics, as I keep saying, sometimes my favorite bits are when they just shut up and play. And I really like those points where they're in a space where I can't tell what song they're in, and probably they can't. Like, you're right about Wharf Rat Going Down the Road, but this is neither of those, right? I mean, there's this middle thing, and I love that kind of stuff. And I'm sort of drawn to it because in some ways, like, there's a surprising number of points in 76 where they get these really good jams that are unrelated to the surrounding songs. And this is one of the standout ones for me, but I encourage people to go back and look for others because they're there. I like the really, like, sometimes like grating part of the Grateful Dead. Like, I like Seastones. I like Feedback, This isn't there, right? That's not what we're hearing in this instance. But it's like we're in that kind of space where we're not attached to any particular melody from the previous song. We're not headed exactly into one from the next song. And I think it's great. And they just kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to say that it happened less, but it happened in a more like structured way with drums and space, like making space for them to just kind of explore a little bit of something between songs. It happens a lot in 76. So I think if I had to label this one, though, to be fair, we're actually the Wharf Rat and Going Down the Road Feeling Bad and this bit in this jam thing, they're all inside, along with some other stuff, this big playing in the band sandwich. So in some ways, I would want to say this jam actually kind of points to that, maybe, than more than the songs on the immediate side of it or something. I don't know, but if anybody even close to that one, I am hugely impressed, and congratulations. That's a tricky one.
It was very tricky. Dave was not only close, he nailed it exactly 76. Paul gets 73. Dave wins. Congratulations on winning, but even more congratulations on nailing that 76. What were you hearing there?
For me, 1976 has a distinct loose sound to it. I kind of heard it right away. I thought they was going into, I was like, what song is this? What are they doing? I was thinking Dancing in the Streets. Almost like that when they lay back into it. Yeah, I was just thinking 76. So it sounded like 1976.
You know your shit, Dave. Congratulations, man. Wow. Paul, good run. A very reasonable 73.
Thanks, man. I thought I heard one drummer in there, so I was going 71, 74. I heard the grand piano, so I knew it was Keith. But other than that, man, I was just cooking. That they were cooking, man. I don't know what was going on. What date was that again? I got to go back and listen. That was awesome.
Yeah. August 2nd, 76.
Yeah, that was rocking, man. That was sounded fucking awesome.
Thank you, Paul. Good run. Dave, congratulations.
Congrats, Dave.
Thanks. Thanks, guys. You guys are awesome.
Drane, Bart, thanks for coming on. Chris, thank you again. There's a link to Clowns in the Burying Ground in the show notes. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks again so much for having me. It was really wonderful. And congrats to Dave and all of you guys. Just like, I'm so impressed with what you can hear. It's great.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. For all the show links, including our YouTube channel, check out the link in the show notes. If you want to be contestant on the show, sponsor the show, or make comments and ask questions, email us at info@guesttheyear.net. Shout out to James, Jack, and Dylan for helping out behind the scenes. Thanks again, Chris, for coming on the show. His new book, Clowns in the Burying Ground, is linked in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to the amazing tapers whose recordings made the show possible. Congratulations, Dave, on becoming the new champion of Guest of the Year. And to other contestants, thanks for playing. And remember, it's all one song anyway.
And I bid you good night, good night, good night. And I bid you good night, good night, good night.